Hello, and welcome to the Classic Land Cruisers podcast. I'm Dan, your host. You can find me on Instagram at FJ40_UMA_Smurf or on I Hate Mud at Mountain Biker. You can find the podcast on Instagram by searching Classic Land Cruisers. Remember to go to reefmonkey.com to get your Classic Land Cruiser podcast merch. Bring your adventure home with inlowgear.com, your source for custom Land Cruiser apparel and merchandise, where adventure becomes art, designed for the road. This episode was brought to you in part by Redline Land Cruisers, Save Your F, by Manafree, your one-stop shop for Land Cruiser parts and service, by Valley Hybrids and Terrain Tamer North America. Okay, welcome to this episode of the Classic Land Cruisers podcast. With me today is Wes Warwick. On Instagram, he is Colonel Mustard, for all the right reasons. He has a Mustard Yellow 40 series, amongst other Land Cruisers. But Wes, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more and how you got into Classic Land Cruisers?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I don't know. I've had a 40 for a long time. I grew up in Virginia. I went out to Crested Butte, became a ski bum, and a lady I worked with was selling a 40. I was actually looking for probably an early Bronco or something else that I could afford. I couldn't really afford this 40, and it eventually came down to she wanted to sell it. Her husband really didn't want to sell it. And she said, "How much money do you have?" And I said, "Well, I got like $2,000. And she said, "Well, give me that $2,000 and a couple hundred out of your next paycheck, and I'll make up the rest to my husband, and don't tell him." So that's how I got my first 40. And that was a red sprung over truck. I'm one of those people that I didn't sell a lot of 40s and buy a lot of 40s. I've kind of kept what I've had over the years. I've sold a few Land Cruisers, but by and part, like, a bunch of my friends generally sell more and buy more than I do. Some reason I kind of keep them around.
Yeah, I would probably, if I could, I would probably have Land Cruiser hoarder syndrome, where I don't get rid of them. And then when people find out how much trouble I've been having with my motor on my 40, they're like, "Just get rid of it." I'm like, no. If anything, I need to get more Land Cruisers.
That's right.
So when one,
well, you always need one.
Yeah,
you always need one to drive when you're working on one.
Yeah. I've said this before on the podcast, but my philosophy is H plus 1 equals N. So however many you have, plus 1 is however many you need. And it's a very fluid formula, but it works for me. So, in my mind, it works. It doesn't work for me. My wife would kill me if I actually lived by that formula. But Yeah. So,
I'm close.
so how many cruisers do you have?
Right now it's probably 6 or 7.
Nice.
Um, I've got Colonel Mustard. That was a truck I found fairly recently. Um, we can get back to that one. My son turned 16 a year and a half ago, and he wanted a 40. Because he kind of grew up in a Land Cruiser household. Always had a 40 and a 70 and a 100 or an 80. And, we found him a 76, something with disc brakes, something with bucket seats and a 3-point seat belt. So it's a little bit safer than, an old school drum brake. So we got that one. Years and years and years ago, I found a 64 that was pretty original. Even has the original toolkit. I can tell you a story about that too. Really original. In fact, I keep it in my office here. It's not in the truck because it's very clean. I've got a 70 series BJ70 out of Canada. It was one of the first. There was a handful of people that had them. I got it in early 2000s. There was a few gray market BJ60s, BJ70s, and the HJ60s that people were getting out of Canada. And, they were pretty rare back then. And, many people didn't have a diesel. It was a Canadian that moved here or something. I always wanted a BJ42, so I figured the next best thing was a BJ70. So that's a fun little truck. It's turboed. It gets great gas mileage. I can tool around the desert for a while without filling up, whereas all my buddies got to take a few, 3 or 4 jerry cans full of gasoline, and I don't have to take any. Wife drives a 200 or a Lexus 570, and then I also have a 100 series for going skiing and hunting and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, that was kind of my dream life when I was growing up, was to move to Colorado and be a ski bum. And then I realized that everybody moves to Colorado to be a ski bum, and I'm like, oh, okay. But then go ahead.
I had a handful of mountains that I wanted to go to, and somehow we stopped in Crested Butte, but we bypassed Vail. We didn't stop in Summit County. We kept going. So Crested Butte was one of them, and really liked the old town. That was back in the early 90s, so it was still a fun time. Lots of 40s running around Gunnison and Crested Butte at that time too.
Yeah, and I've come to realize that Colorado is kind of a hidden gem for finding Land Cruisers. Not just 40s or 60s or 80s, but all types of Land Cruisers, and they all kind of gravitate towards Colorado. It's not a bad thing, but it's one of those things that when you first hear about it, you're like, well, why is there so many Land Cruisers in Colorado? And then you realize that you've got all the 14,000 foot peaks and everything else, and so you quickly realize, oh yeah, I can see why Colorado would be a sought after destination for Land Cruisers. So did your son get any input on picking out his 40, or?
Not really. We were kind of, I was kind of keeping my ears out for something that would come along, and it actually came up on our Rising Sun forum. I've been active with the club for a long time.
Yeah.
Still do stuff with them here and there, but somebody had posted something, and I kind of forgot about it, and then I think they texted me or something else and say, hey, I'm going down to see this lady. Are you still interested in this? And I said, oh yeah, I kind of forgot about it. I thought it sold. Let me know. And so he took a few more pictures of it. Of course, you couldn't really see a ton. People take pictures and you think it's better than it is. And,
Yeah.
there's not as much rust as there normally is. And there's more mice than there normally is. And, you can't see those. Um, so I figured what the heck, I'd call her. And we went down to Pagosa, took a trailer. So you knew it was coming back. Um,
Yeah, you're kind of
and,
right.
yeah, so we got there, we looked it over, it didn't seem bad. Of course, I forgot my compression tester or vacuum tester. Vacuum will tell you actually quite a lot about it. But I figured, like I said, it wasn't too bad rust wise. I mean, it had some rust. It was a vehicle that was a tool for her. Many people that owned 40s way back when, or Land Cruisers way back when, for a lot of people, they were just a tool and a means to get around.
Yeah.
But she was on the fire department in Conifer, and she needed to be able to drive in any kind of snow condition or whatever. At one time, I don't have pictures of it, but the hardtop is drilled for like lights and sirens, and there was a gaggle of wiring everywhere and toggle switches and drilled into the dash and this and that. But, we struck a deal. I knew it was going to need some work. We drug it home. It got it cleaned up and running. There was probably, I don't know, 10 or 20 mice in the back seat or in the seat backs. We finally got rid of those, and I could never really get it running really as good as I thought I could. I'm pretty handy with the old 2F carburetors. Some folks taught me, back in the early 90s or mid 90s, like how to kind of tune these, and I run into Jim Chenoweth and G. Smitter a few times, and so I felt like I was pretty handy, but I could never get it running like I wanted to. And so I was like, well, I told my son, well, to be a 40 pilot, you've got to be able to work on cruisers.
Yeah.
So I said, we're going to pull the head and do a backyard rebuild. So we'll pull the pistons, re-ring it, slap it together, and maybe it'll be better than what it is. So I did that, and I made a total rookie mistake because it had been a long time since I did that. I forgot to hone the piston or hone the cylinders when I re-ring it.
Oh yeah.
And it wouldn't seal, and I was like, well, if I'm pulling the head out, we're just going to rebuild this thing. So we just pulled it out and tore it all down, took it in, got it poured over, I think 20 over maybe. It was hard to find dome pistons. Got it balanced, put it all back together, and that 2F is strong. I can't keep up with them in the hills.
Oh yeah.
He'll run up Bale Pass. He can do most of it, and still in fourth gear, barely hits third gear. I'm struggling in third.
Yeah. I have the motor that I had in my 40, and anyone who has been around a while knows the whole saga. But I ended up I bought a new 2F motor, or not new, but out of a 76 40. I bought a 2F out of that, and it had those infamous, hard to find domed pistons. And, but part of the reason why it suffered another mechanical failure is I've always said that my Land Cruiser only ever gives me an ID10T code. And so it's usually the loose nut behind the wheel that caused that. And I didn't have very good compression, but I had good RPMs. And so I was running it I'm like, I need to fix the vacuum leaks. Or I had great compression. I had poor vacuum. And so I was like, I need to fix the vacuum leaks, but I'll still drive it. And with the vacuum leaks, I wasn't getting a lot of power going uphill, and it was always like riding in the bike lane, going up a hill, or driving in the bike lane, but then I smoked the thrust bearing a couple months ago. So right now it's at Higgy's Off Road, and I'm trying to get it paid for so that I can go pick it up and have my Land Cruiser back, so I can get it ready to go up to Colorado. So do all of your Land Cruisers have names, or is it just Colonel Mustard?
Yeah, it's really just Colonel Mustard. I'm surprised, I'm sure probably some other folks have used it, but I don't know, it just kind of fit that truck. None of my other ones really do, have a name. Just call it 40. When you only have one, you can just call it a 40,
Yeah.
the 100, the 70. So that's what the other ones are called.
Yeah. It's one of the things that kind of stuck out to me when I found your Instagram page is Colonel Mustard. And obviously when you hear Colonel Mustard, you think of Clue. Well, a little while ago, I found it's not Hot Wheels, it's not Matchbox, it's not Johnny Lightning. Maybe it is Johnny Lightning, but it said, so a little while ago, I was at like a Target or something, and I found some diecast car company had done Clue characters, and there was a Professor Plum 40 series, and it was all purple, and it had a poker token and everything else. And normally when I buy a Hot Wheels, unless it's like in a multi-pack, I don't take them out of the blister, but I took this one out, and you can like take the roof off of it, you can open up the hood, and I'm like, this is really cool. And that's one of the ones I have on my permanent display at work. And
that's cool.
I think I bought one for my son, and I also bought one for another coworker who he had the LX 470 100 series Land Cruiser a while ago. So does your son kind of make his 40 part of his whole persona now?
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much known, I guess in school or, whatever, for driving the 40.
Yeah.
And he's been with me every step of the way, like when we pulled the motor and the head and have done everything. We actually swapped the frame on it too. There's kind of an issue with the frame. A friend of ours loaned a shop to us, and, we lifted the body off. We took a good frame in, got it powder coated, and then did a full chassis swap onto a new frame for him. So it's pretty sweet. He's got a 2.5-inch lift, and it's fully powder coated. And now he's in welding at school, in high school, so he can, tear into as much as he wants and refix it if it doesn't look good. I had an old tailgate, OEM soft top tailgate, that he kind of cleaned the bottom channel up and re-welded it. And last weekend, I think we took the top off and the doors off, and there's nothing better than being a teenager with no top and no doors, except when it's 40 and raining in Colorado.
My son, we just recently bought, or my daughter recently bought her first car that she's actually paid for herself. And it's a 3rd gen 4Runner. and she's made that her whole internet persona. And then my son wanted a newer car or a better car, and we got him a second gen 4Runner, and he's also in welding. When I bought this Tundra that I'm sitting in, it had this huge, massive ladder rack on it. It's a 8-foot bed. The top of the ladder rack was 14 feet, and it was like custom built onto the truck. And I told my son, I'm like, if this ladder rack doesn't sell, you can take the ladder rack and use it to make an off-road bumper for your 4Runner. And so he did that. He took it off of the Tundra, pulled it into the garage. It was so big it didn't fit in the garage, our little carport that we have. And he started like cutting it up and sectioning it off. And sure enough, this last weekend, Sunday, he finished off the rear off-road bumper for his 4Runner. And now he's like playing video games with 4Runners. I told him that this summer we're going to be going up to Idaho to visit my parents. But on the way up, we're going to stop in Salt Lake City and go to the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. And he's like, are there any 4Runners there? I'm like, it's the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. Land Cruisers. He's like, well, I want to see 4Runners. And so, and then my daughter commented today, she's like, people who buy 4Runners can't afford to buy Land Cruisers. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of true. It's kind of a half truth, but because I couldn't afford to buy a Land Cruiser, and I did. And I bought a Land Cruiser, but it is what it is. So, I mean, my first vehicle that I paid for myself was a second gen 4Runner. Mine was a manual though, and the one he has is an automatic. And so, he just absolutely loves that 4Runner. And when he built this bumper, he kind of had an idea of what he wanted to do, and he started making all the measurements and cutting and everything else. And he's just like, and he kind of did it all out of his mind. He had the picture in his mind, and he built the bumper from that. Now we just need to find a way to mount the spare tire and have a swing out carrier for that bumper, which will be good.
That's awesome. That's a great skill for, some kids to have, is being able to know how to turn on a welder and create some sparks.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is he did it with like a little lunchbox welder that we got on Amazon. It's not a high dollar Lincoln or Miller welder. It's just this little 110 amp or 110 volt lunchbox welder, and I can kind of bubblegum metal together. Although I'm probably one of the better welders at work. And he's already infinitely better than I am. And so everyone's like, well, did you build it for him? I'm like, I did. I held it in place so that when he was grinding, it would work. And when we were trying to mount it up, it would work. That's all I did. He did all the rest of it. He did the fabricating, the welding, and all of it. So,
that's awesome.
So, oh man, what would be like your dream Land Cruiser setup?
Well, it's probably Colonel Mustard.
Okay.
I've had a 40 for a long time. Like I was saying, since early 90s, longer than some, not as long as most, or some others. But when I bought that, it was a sprung over truck. I fixed a lot of stuff. They need track bars. You got to have, before there was high steer, you had to have a double steering arm. Mine didn't have that. It was just the tie rod was bent under the spring, and so I did a bunch of work to get it kind of roadworthy, or it was, I shouldn't say roadworthy. I mean, it went down the road, but it would follow the ruts, and it was a scary machine.
Yeah.
Um, so after that, I felt like I always wanted like a stock truck, or basically like a 2.5 inch lift, still 33s. You can do a little bit of light wheeling, but like it's not a crawler, or it's
Yeah.
something that didn't have a ton of rust. And I always wanted that kind of mustard color. Like once I knew all the colors, mine was a freeborn red, the sprung over one. But I always liked the mustard yellow. I always wanted a 78, so the 77 is close enough. This is an earlier 77, so it doesn't have the
Yeah.
little defrost tubes for the side windows, which I could put in, and I actually have a set, but this truck is so clean and so original that I just can't modify it, like that.
Well, for me,
But
the first cruiser I was in, I always get this date wrong, but it was again a 77 mustard yellow 40 series. It was my cousin's, but so it was mustard yellow, but it had a black hood, and it stood out like none other. And there was one time that we were out target shooting, and we had to go back to his house, and I was sitting in the back jump seat, and we're going up this hill, and it just seemed like we were climbing straight up a wall. And I'm kind of holding on to the roll bar for dear life. And I'm 12 years old, 12, 13 years old. And I'm like thinking, this is the coolest vehicle ever that could just climb up a wall. And the jump seats were just awesome. And that's when I fell in love with these old Land Cruisers. And it was just like, after that, I'm like, I have to have one. I have to have one. My cousin had since sold that one. I'm like, and I get emotionally attached to every single Land Cruiser I see. The ones in passing, not as much, but like once I walked around it and looked in it and everything else, I'm really invested in it. And for when he sold his 40, I was just like, oh man, why did he have to sell it? And then when I bought my 40, first person I texted was him. I sent him a picture, and he's just like, oh man, I got to get a 40. And so he has another 40. I think this one's a 78. And I went up to Idaho a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, and I went out to visit him to see his 40, and he's like, here, you want to drive it? I'm like, you're actually letting me drive your 40? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, this is so cool. And so he let me drive his 40. And again, it's another mustard yellow. I think this one's a 78. But it was just, it's kind of come full circle how he got me into Land Cruisers, and then I got him back into Land Cruisers. And now it's just like, I'll never get rid of my Land Cruiser, despite how many people say, dude, with all the engine problems you've had, you need to get rid of that thing. I'm like, nope, not happening, not going to happen. Only reason I would get rid of it is to buy another one. So I might as well keep the one that I have. But
yeah, 40s always just have a soft spot. Once you've had a 40 and you've driven a 40, it just kind of never leaves you.
yeah, exactly. So have you had any like real significant breakdowns in your 40 series or any of your Land Cruisers?
I would say not any serious breakdowns. I would say they always have gotten me back, but you know, um, sometimes the heads are just not in I think the U.S. we run them hard on the highways.
Yeah.
I mean, most of these older Land Cruisers, they're meant to go 55, 60, not 75, 80. I had an FJ60 at one time. The head was cracked, or either I cracked it, or it was a hairline crack, and it got worse. But for the most part, they've always gotten me home, and then I've been able to fix them at home. So I don't think I've really ever been stranded. One time, maybe in the 70 series, there's a bunch of us on a run, and um, out of the steering arm, the ball, we were going around a turn in Devil's Lane and Canyonlands, and there's this hard turn to go out to Chestler Park, and the tie rod actually popped out of that ball.
Oh,
It was
man.
old, kind of rusted, and luckily, friend Marco had a C clamp with him because we couldn't, you know, turn that rusted. It's the same as FJ60s or 60 series. That, or even on 40s. The push pull where that cup mounts onto the ball. Well,
Yeah.
when that's really rusted, you can't turn it and unscrew it to like get it back in. So we use that C clamp to like pop it back in, and then we had some baling wire, and it was good for the rest of the trip. So
Yeah. So, where do you normally take your Land Cruisers? Do you just stay around Colorado, or do you venture out further away?
yeah, mostly Colorado, Utah. We used to go out there, like twice a year. Um, Now it's maybe once a year because hunting season kind of. We used to go quite a bit in the fall, depending on if we pull tags. But as my son was old enough to start hunting, they give youth quite a bit of opportunity for tags in Colorado. So for the past 5 years, we've been hunting in the fall quite a bit. But I'm like most people, spent a lot of time in Moab until it kind of got busy, and then we spend more time in southern Utah and just exploring roads and the Bears Ears, and for a while it's we go down there and you just use our Land Cruiser to drive dirt roads to get down those roads to then be able to hike to old Native American ruins. And at one time we kind of called ourselves the Page 62 Boys, because if you open the DeLorme map on page 62, we were going to drive every road and explore every road on that map. So quite a bit, into the Swell, and over to Zion and some other places. But mostly Colorado. Done most of the passes here. Maybe not everything, but all the traditional, Pearl Pass, and Black Bear, and all those others we've done with the club, and even on our own. And but Utah is great. Just love to go out there and bounce around the desert for a week.
Yeah. I was telling my daughter's orthodontist that I was coming up to Colorado in August, and they used to live up there, and they're like, "Oh, you're gonna love Colorado. It's great." And I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of want to do." And being an outsider, I was like, "Yeah, I want to do Yankee Boy. I want to do Imagine Pass." And she's like, "You got to sound like a local. It's Emogene." I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And there's like one other one that I want to do while I'm up there. And it's one of the, it's not Black Bear, but it's one of the other well-known trails
Like
out
near or something.
Yeah. But I'm
Yeah,
like,
that whole area with the Alpine Loop, and then going into Silverton, and then you can go over to Ophir, and over to Telluride, and back around. That's all classic
Yeah.
passes that are just beautiful.
Yeah. So is there a place that you would have like bucket list trail that you'd want to go do in your 40s or in any of your Land Cruisers?
I guess bucket list. I've never done the Rubicon. A bunch of the Rising Sun folks
Yeah.
did a thing to go out to the Rubicon, and like that was actually the year my son was born. They did that in 2008. We haven't been back. We should. But it's kind of crazy. I've never done Rubicon. I should. Um, I guess if anything, that's kind of a bucket list.
Love to do the Rubicon, but I would almost want to do it in somebody else's vehicle just because I have 31s and 31s aren't very good for named obstacles. In fact, named obstacles still scare the crap out of me. A guy that I work with, he was doing this one trail and it has a named obstacle. And last time I went down it, went down to it, I got to the obstacle and I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing this. This is too scary, and I'm only on 31s. He's like, I'm on 31s and I can do it, and he ended up having to get towed out. Well, he was going out there again to this trail on Sunday, and he's like, yeah, you and your son should come out in his 4Runner to the trail. And I'm like, I don't know. I think he's working on his bumper that day. And
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, we went out and did it, but yeah, you probably need 33s to do that trail now. Just because every time I go out there, it gets harder and harder to do anything. And I'm like, well, both my son and I are both on 31, 10 and a half, 15. So it's like, that'd be hard.
Yeah.
So
I'm kind of the same.
How often do you get approached by people when you're driving your Land Cruisers around?
Quite a bit. I mean, even the 100 series, people are like, I got one too.
Yeah.
The 40s, like, I was, I finally got Colonel Mustard running. So kind of the backstory is, we were looking for a skid plate for my son, and
Yeah.
I texted this guy and said, hey, do you have this? And he's like, I think I do. Send me a picture of the skid plate you're looking for. So we went over to his house, and he had a bunch of cruisers in his driveway, and he had one covered up, and my son was like, what's that? And he goes, well, that's not for sale. He's like, well, but what is it? I can tell it's probably a 40 because it's covered up, but you could tell by the wheels and maybe the bottom of the hubcaps. And he says, well, that's a old mustard yellow 77 FJ40. He's like, but it needs an engine. And I was like, oh, well, I actually happen to have an engine sitting in my garage floor that's good, because when we did my son's frame swap, it came as a rolling chassis. So this guy bought this 40, completely disassembled it, thought he was going to rebuild everything, and the body, and it was just too rusty, tore it down and couldn't put it back together. So I bought it as a rolling chassis, and it had a good motor, and we used the frame for his truck, and then I had a motor sitting there. And so I asked the dude, I was like, well, what are you going to do with this thing? He was like, well, I'm going to fix it up and sell it. I'll flip it. And I was like, well, I got a good motor. I've just done all the engine work to my son's truck. Like, let me have a crack at it. You've had it for 10 years. Like, I'll get it running. And he said, so we went back and forth for a while. I mean, it was I wouldn't say it was it's not like a barn find. He knew what he had, I knew what he had, but he wanted to see it back on the road. I wanted it. He wanted to sell something, so we made a deal. And I got that motor in the truck and running in 2 months so I could title it in Colorado without having to pay a fee.
Nice.
So that's how that kind of went down. And um, you know, a friend of mine and I will go to a brewery and have a beer every once in a while with his 40, and he was like, he's got a 13 BT in his 40, and it's pretty clean too. It's the dune beige color, and he's like, he pulls in, and he was like, as soon as you pulled in, he was like, every head in this place turned and was checking that thing out. He was like, and it's partly a 40, but it's partly the color too, that it
Yeah.
just, is such a classic color, that it's crazy. So now when I take it out, people are, will honk, wave, you know, approach. I went to Ace the other day, or a couple weeks ago, and some kids were outside, like as we were walking back out, and they were looking at it, and a couple, it's like 12, 13-year-old kids, and they were like, "This is cool." And
Yeah.
then we walked over and opened the door and hopped in, and they just kind of looked at it. So I get approached, especially with the 40s. What year is it? I had one, or my dad had one, or my buddy had one.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
So they're all always a conversation starter.
Yeah. Now, did you add the fender flares, or was that on it when you bought it?
No, that was on it when I bought it. Um, I may One of them is a little rough, but the parts that he gave me, there's another fender flare. They're kind of growing on me a little bit. Like, I really want a pretty clean stock truck. I mean, if you look at this truck, it's really amazing how clean it is.
Yeah.
Um, like, the rear sill literally has no rust at all. Like,
Oh, that's unheard
it's
of.
it is almost unheard of, and it's original. Um, and the guy that bought it or found it originally was in Las Vegas, and he's on Mud too. I actually
Yeah.
contacted him, and he didn't remember why the original owners were selling it, but he, gave me a few pictures of when he found it. So it was a one owner truck. When he got it, passed between two other people to me. But a Las Vegas truck, no rust. But every seal and every rubber component needed replaced. So
Yeah.
I've been working through that. The only thing I have left is the hardtop seal that go around the hardtop. But all the door seals are new, OEM Toyota. There's not a rattle in the truck, which is amazing. You can have a conversation with somebody when you're driving it, which is kind of cool. Like I said, no rattles. Like most of everything, there's at least some kind of squeak or rattle. But
Oh,
this
yeah.
thing is just amazing. Like, because the body fits so tight, and it's especially with all new rubber, it's really a survivor. So I don't want to beat it up too much. The bad
Yeah.
news is, fender flares were installed and the fenders were cut, but that was a popular thing to do in the 80s.
Yeah. I
So
still haven't quite decided if I am all for fender flares or not. And I have a feeling that in order for me to put the fender flares on mine, if I was to ever get the fender flares, I would have to be all in 100%. And I don't know if I'm there or not. I got some best top soft doors and at one point for a 40, and I put them in, and I think I had those for 2 seasons, 2 summers. and I put them in and would cruise around in the summer with the soft tours. And for some reason, towards the end of the second summer, I come out of work and I look at it. I'm like, you know what? I'm not sold on it. I've had them for a year and a half. I'm not sold on it. It just doesn't look right. And so I ended up doing like a 3-way trade with a collector in town and another guy from Mud, from my cruiser club, and they look great on his 40 because he had a rag top, a soft top, and I'm like, just the soft doors on mine just never looked right. And I'd have a feeling if I had the fender flares, I would be that same way. But it's one of those things that once it happens, you can't really go back from that. Especially if you're drilling and cutting in your fenders, and it's like, yeah, I don't know if I'd ever be 100%. I mean, on yours, they look great. And it looks like it belongs, but it would also encourage me to get like wider tires and widen my wheels and get like 12.5-inch wide tires. And I don't know. I think I'm just, and even in saying this, I've gone back and forth in my mind about the fender flares. So I see them, I'm like, oh yeah, that actually looks kind of cool. But then I talk myself out of it and I talk myself into it, and it's just like, I should not have them just because I can't commit to it. So
Yeah, I mean, I think 31s or 33s, they tuck up into the fender wells. The fender flares way back when were people that wanted to run like 1250 tires and wider tires, and I get it. It's one of the things that I think I will eventually, because the truck is so clean otherwise, that I'll probably get new metal welded back in to somebody like Jeremiah Profits. And I know he can do that kind of stuff much better than I can. I know he's done it before, and I may do it. Like you said, it does look good because kind of the white top and the white flares and the white bezel kind of all match, and it really kind of pops. But if I had my druthers, I would probably not do it, or on mine,
yeah,
I'd probably end up putting it back to original, just because original trucks are so clean and hard to come by these days.
yeah. I always joke that when I need to do more metal work on my 40, I'm not going to hire the same I hired last time to fix the patch panels or cut out the rust and weld in new stuff. And everyone's like, didn't you do it? I'm like, yes, I did. I am the one who did the crappy welds. Yes, that is me. And on my passenger fender, I had a crack in the right where the fender comes up and then flattens off. There was a crack right there at that bend, and I didn't worry about it. When I painted it without the crack being repaired. I'm like, I'm not going to worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. I did stop drill it, and after I burned up that thrust bearing, I had it on a charger, and every day I'd have to unplug it from the charger and all this other stuff. And I kept snagging my pants or my shorts on it. And finally I just told my son, I'm like, hey, if you ever get a chance, could you fix that crack? And he did an amazing job on it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm never doing my own metal work again. I might be having my son do metal work for me and cut out rust and everything else, just because he's better at it than I am. So here's a question that a question that I got from my daughter, but how has owning a Land Cruiser changed you?
Huh, that's a good question. Um, I don't know. I think I was always kind of on the path of like um having something like a Land Cruiser. I mean, I didn't know what a Land Cruiser. Growing up outside of DC, like there's not a ton of Land Cruisers and like off road, and you really needed one. It was probably just a nice to have. Or I wanted a Jeep, probably like most people. CJ7 was awesome. Um, buddy, buddy of mine came back from college in Wisconsin with a early Bronco, and we worked on that all summer. And then when we were going out to Crested Butte, we found my buddy that I was going to ski bumming with. We actually missed somebody driving from Colorado to DC and then sold his 40. We almost bought it to drive it back to Colorado and ski bum. But, I'd say how it's changed my life is probably just the people that you meet through it, and
Yeah.
some friendships that evolve that don't involve Land Cruisers. So you may meet somebody through Land Cruisers, but then you have a friendship otherwise outside of Land Cruisers, bikes or hunting or something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to Heather Royston last week of TLCA, and she kept saying that you could meet somebody with a Land Cruiser, and just because of this vehicle being among like-minded people, you already have that natural bond and friendship, and it's just great because you can once you get a Land Cruiser, you're almost instantly adopted into the community. And yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah. You're always going to get help from somebody, or, if I see somebody on the side of the road that, they've got a Land Cruiser, I'm definitely stopping to, help them. But, on the trail, like we don't, we're out on the trail. We never leave anybody,
Yeah.
So yeah, like, there's just that inherent kind of Land Cruiser, that you're generally of a like-minded by having one. So then it kind of leads into, like I said, probably some other things too that we like to do.
Yeah.
And friendships just evolve from that. So that part is great.
Yeah. So that kind of will lead into this question, and this is one of my most favorite questions. And even people who have listened to my podcast before get kind of surprised and kind of shocked by this question. But if you could have anybody riding shotgun with you in Colonel Mustard, who would it be? It could be historical, it could be fictional, it could be sentimental. This is your dream ride with anybody. Who are you having on shotgun?
Huh. That's a good one. Maybe, I guess, outside of my son. I've heard you ask that to some other people. Um, hmm, I don't know. Maybe somebody like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, somebody like that. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd have to ask them if they can fix a wagon before they get in, because you might need them to help you on the trail.
Not meant to be fast vehicle. 55, 60, 65 miles an hour is typically the top speed. A lot of times they're not comfortable because they're on leaf springs, and the seats aren't very comfortable because they're old technology or whatever. but they don't have the same creature comforts that we demand in newer vehicles. But why do you think we love them so much?
Yeah, I don't know. You're just like close to kind of the road. It's interesting. I mean, a 40 just like people, whatever it is, I mean, similar to a Jeep, but it's crazy because the people that had 40s are just like, I mean, 40 people, right? Like, I mean, you'll be in some
Yeah.
little town in Colorado, somebody comes up to you and it's like, I had a 40 for 20 years and um so I don't know what it is that it's like just the metal and it was just always so rugged and tough and it felt like people felt like safe, like it was always going to get you home because it was
Yeah.
built so tough, so Spartan. And you kind of feel close to the road. Like I don't mind really like no radio. Like I just like listening to kind of the road noise and the engine and driving. Like I never generally have a radio on a lot of these rigs, or might just
Yeah.
have the CB or ham radio on. Um, but yeah, they're just simple. The smell sometimes like of the old gas and exhaust kind of smell. Like I just kind of nostalgia if you grew up like that. It just brings you back to an earlier time.
Yeah. That I kind of took away one other question that I was going to ask, but uh, one question that I like to ask is what's on your Land playlist. But it sounds like you just listen to the one song is what you listen to when you're driving your Land Cruiser around.
Pretty much, and sometimes you got to be in tune with the cruiser. Some of these that like with Colonel Mustard, we put the engine in. Um, you kind of got to be in tune with it for a little bit to be able to read it and understand, if something's out of whack. Um, Perfect example of why I do that is that um, after I put the engine in, um, I should have run it with the valve cover off, and I didn't. I figured, this thing runs good. It was in a previous cruiser. I changed the water pump and put new fuel pump and everything on when I put it in. But it was making excessive valve train noise. And if you're
Yeah.
listening to a radio or you had a Bluetooth in there or something, you wouldn't have picked that up. And I was like, that's kind of out of the ordinary. So I popped the oil fill cover off and looked in there and I was like, oh, that rocker looks a little dry. Um, Investigated, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to pull this off. Pulled it off, ran the engine, no oil's coming to the head or to the rockers.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the heck is that? I just drove it 800 miles and, figured out that finally I pulled the head last weekend. So it's sitting in the garage with the head off. The head's down at the machine shop. But I pulled the head and somebody put that engine that I had sitting in my garage that I thought was a good engine, somebody had put the head gasket on upside down and it blocked the
Oh
oil galley cartridge.
man.
S- it's not uncommon, it's not common, but you
Yeah.
know, like I did all kinds of troubleshooting to, spray stuff and a pick down in there. And finally I was like, I'm pulling the head. Sure enough, the head gasket. And I didn't notice like they did a really good job of cutting the front of the head gasket. So like when I put the water pump on, I didn't notice at all. Really, where I should have noticed was on the back. There's a little tab, and I just didn't catch that. So nothing that can't be fixed. Heads at the machine shop. The valve train is. I need new rockers. Um, but I've got a. Luckily, I have an extra set of those. But that's kind of why I like the the tune of the engine, the sound of the engine, because
Yeah.
it'll tell you a lot.
Yeah. Well, we are right near an hour if I'm calculations right. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
No, just keep driving them. I'd say, the one thing that I always tell my son is never, I'd never try and take my Land Cruiser apart where I can't get it back together and not drive it. Because the longer it is down and not driven, the closer it becomes to just being a project that sits around that will never drive again. And I've seen so
Yeah.
many people do that, they just tear something down and then it ends up just sitting there. Um, So I always try and keep all of my stuff running. I have one that my original red 40 doesn't run right now. It's out at a storage lot that my son and I are going to pull it back here in a couple weeks and work on it this summer and get it going again. But I always generally try and keep all of mine in running condition. Yeah, obviously you have to work on them, but I never
Yeah.
take it down so much that I can't drive it within, a couple weeks. That's that's just how I operate. Not everybody's like that.
Yeah. Well, Wes, it was great talking to you, and thank you for coming on the podcast. I enjoyed hearing the stories that you had to share. So, again, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Classic Land Cruisers podcast. As always, remember to go to reefmonkey.com to get your Classic Land Cruiser podcast merch. Bring your adventure home with inlowgear.com, your source for custom Land Cruiser apparel and merchandise, where adventure becomes art, designed for the road. Again, this episode was brought to you in part by Redline Land Cruisers, Save Your F, by Manafree, your one-stop shop for Land Cruiser parts and service, by Valley Hidebirds and Terrain Tamer North America. As for me, the mountains are calling and I must go.